All of the latest major events in European politics have had a twofold implication. Wherever the challenges grew, the potential for a progressive European civil society also became visible. From austerity politics to free trade negotiations, from the refugee movement to Brexit, from nationalist governments to the rise of far-right movements, in all these cases, European citizens organized themselves and stood up for a Europe of openness, tolerance and solidarity. But despite these signs of hope, the overall political situation undoubtedly requires more in terms of coordinated answers from a progressive left. The challenges, with right-wing populism and neoliberalism at the top of the list, can only be faced through broad alliances of citizens that have the capacity for strategic, political thinking and acting. In order to reclaim these courses, streets, parliaments and governments, civil society has to organize and push forward a radical and democratic change that highlights and focuses on their commonalities rather than their differences. How can existing parties and grassroots networks cooperate in order to build capacity and gain political influence? What kind of challenges do social movements face when they work with parties? We are today at the summer school of the Activist Fora series in Rijeka in Croatia. So today's topic is about building networks of power inside and outside of institutions, and we're going to take advantage that we have three participants here of the fora from the region to talk a little bit about this. So the first thing is, when talking about alliances between grassroots organizations or citizens and political parties, last month on the local level we had the example of the local elections in Zagreb, Croatia, with the citizens platform Zagreb je naš, Zagreb is ours, who are citizens that made alliances with parties from the left and from the Green movement to actually run for elections, and they won 4 seats at the local council, which can be seen as an achievement because it's not that often that this kind of platforms actually win elections on the local level. So my first question to you, and maybe you can relate to other examples, there might be that we don't know, do you need more of that in the region, and do you think it's like a good example of building alliances? So maybe we can start from the door.
Okay, so I'm not from Croatia and I don't know that much detail on Zagreb je naš, but that's actually one of the initiatives that have been entering parliament since the new left has slowly emerged during the 2000s. So in Slovenia we have the initiative called Democratic Socialism, which entered the parliament a few years ago and which actively contributes to broadening a bit this left-wing politics in the region, and it's an example that in Serbia is followed by this left-wing summit of Serbia and also Zagreb je naš in Croatia. And I think the most important contribution of these parties is that they all learn from each other, and they're not simply parliamentary oriented, but in a sense come from movements that have been initiated or have been reacting against neoliberal austerity policies from 2008 onwards after the crisis. So in a sense, I think this represents a return of the Balkan social movements in a way that's not at all similar to what we had in the 50s, the 60s with the Communist Party, but an attempt to rebuild it, because after the fall of Yugoslavia, after its breakup, socialism has been in a sense stigmatized in the public discourse, and this is the first time that's came back in.
Yeah, there's been also, I would say, loosely ideological alliances as well across the region, because we've seen authoritarian tendencies across the region. So there have been alliances that are against something or pro-reforms, but those reforms are not necessarily heavily ideologically informed. And those are slippery slopes. But then, as a side effect, not as the intended consequence, but as the unintended consequence, we've also seen parties that get internally more democratic as a result of their interaction or their alliances with social movements, even when they are ideologically loose, let alone when they're not. So that's something that, of course, we need more of.
Okay. Ivan,
Okay, well, I agree with what was said earlier, though I'm a little bit skeptical regarding the possibilities of implementing these grassroots movements into the left parties. I think that one of the main problems with nowadays politics and with NGOs, including the grassroots movement, is actually a complete lack of ideology and complete lack of a system of political ideas. So they are reacting to certain problems in a society, and I think it's good, and I think they are actually identifying important problems in society, but nonetheless they are not ready to put it into a system of ideas and a system of beliefs that they will then strongly argue for. And especially in Croatia, there have been other examples of this grassroots movement advocating for some form of direct democracy. One of them is, for example, Pravo na grad in Zagreb, saying that certain streets should not be made into a parking area, but should be left for people. Then there is in Dubrovnik, with on the hill above Dubrovnik, there is an idea to put some elite tourism and golf terrains and so on, and the people said no, we don't want to ruin that beautiful hill, and so on. But all these cases were actually reactions to certain problems made by political parties. And I'm afraid that mostly in Croatia, the grassroots movements actually start as a reaction towards a problem and not as something that offers cooperation, collaboration with political parties, apart from those on the right. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting insight. I mean, here with Activist Fora, there is a trial to build a platform where we could develop policies and demands that could actually inspire, I mean, progressive left forces in the region, actually both outside of the institutional sphere, but also inside in a way, because there is this idea, and there is some papers that have been written by participants about the relationships that they have to have with political parties. You've mentioned a few challenges, but maybe because you've said different things, I mean, what do you think? What do you think is the best strategy? What should we start in next? Should we first start to build networks of production of economic and social power first, and then to make sure that they have a proper demands and very strong and very clear, and then try to influence political parties? Or do you think this should be in parallel, and how? Maybe Elena, we can start with you.
Yeah, that's a tough question, and we've in Macedonia, for instance, we've been having this discussion for a long time. Now that we have a new social democratic government, who in the past, I would say actually, as a result of the strong activist movement, has been moved to the left a lot. So if you analyze the past election programs of the Social Democrats, the latest one, which came after all the different movements that we've had, when we had a strong movement outside the party or not outside the institutions, we managed to pull them to the left in a way. At the same time, now they are involving certain activists who are also experts in their fields. It's not just because they're activists. In the institutions. And I am skeptical, because the moment you're in the institution and you act as an individual, it's much easier, it's harder to resist. Let's put it that way. So I think, but at the same time, you cannot change things unless you are there to influence them. So I think we need both. I don't think it's an either or. I think we need people in the institutions, but also strong social movements outside to hold them accountable.
Basically, a lot of movements are anti-establishment in a sense, and I agree with this, yeah. But also you have the side of the establishment which cannot continue by itself. I mean, basically any sort of alternative policy would be more viable than what we have now. I mean, we can look at the labor laws throughout the region, which are completely disintegrating social rights, legalizing precarious labor. This is not going to attract foreign direct investments. It's not going to solve anything. It just increases social instability. It's dubious, I think, the ways in which we practice neoliberalism. I mean, the governments which practice neoliberalism, that they do this ritually, they do this habitually, without any sort of institutional awareness of how their own institutions function. And in this sense, I think that the movements with these ideas that they do have, in a sense, have, I think, still more viable alternative to the ones that are held by the government, basically. I mean, I don't say this because we should be optimistic in which these ways which these movements are developing, but that's actually the crucial point. It's a process. It's not, a single issue or complex issue that these movements just put forward and it's there, so it's done. There's no recipe. But in this sense, something other, I think, emerges now in these recent movements. I mean, if you look at Zagreb and Naš, if you look at Nedavno Belgrade, if you look at the Rog Factory in Slovenia, these are not movements which just blatantly go against institutions. They have put forward their own ways how the things should function. In Niš, there's also the tenants movements. In Kraljevo, the local initiative. In Novi Sad, the student movement. These are all the people that I think are not stupid. They're not like without any sort of idea how something should function. Tomorrow, our system can function like this better, if it was instituted in a way. And what I'm aiming at is a triangle between institution, governments, and movements. So this is something also that you can see the European Union advocating, and I'm talking about the Berlin process, which is also a viable thing that's happening in the Western Balkans. Basically, it's a pause in Euro integrations, and one of the issues that was raised during this process is the participatory dimension of social movements, grassroots movement in policy making, which I think also can be dangerous, but it also does show a sign that a crack is already there. So the elites don't know where to lead basically now, and all of these movements are in a process of creating different alternatives. I mean, what we're doing now in Rijeka, policy papers, discussing alternatives. It's not a single event. I mean, you have all these events in the Balkans throughout different organizations, platforms, and the ones I mentioned, the Initiative for Democratic Socialism in Slovenia, actually has a theoretical part. It's the Institute for Labor Studies, which is influencing the party in a sense. I mean, most of us in the social movements come from philosophical, social backgrounds. This is, I think, not a coincidence in a way that we're not simply going in the streets waving our own red flags. It's making this happen for some reason as well.
To continue on the earlier question, I believe that there's an important distinction between grassroots levels, grassroots movements at the local level and at the national level, and I think it's a completely different approach towards problems that we are facing as political party or as the local administration, because at national level or even European level, you have a highly strict division between ideas and the policies that you want to affect, influence a lot of people, and they're combined and their values are conflicted. To try to construct a system, because we don't have now a system. We have, as left parties, we maybe have as party members, but people usually no longer think in political systems. They think in answers to certain problems, and we want to create that system again. That's the only way for the left to live again. And of course, the other thing is how can we resolve this problem at the local level. I believe that at the local level, we can combine different political ideologies. So we no longer, the initiative does not have to start from political parties. It can start from local administration. It can start from grassroots movements themselves. But it's a different level. It's a different level of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, if you, and it's true, it's difficult also to have the time and the space. It's a little bit of a luxury also to be able to create an alternative system. I mean, you need to have people that have the time to do it. You need to go in places, not only in capital cities, or not only speak on the theoretical level, but it's important because it nourishes, the practical elements of politics. But it's also interesting, also what you said but towards the big challenges, which can be neoliberalism, or then it becomes really difficult because this is a machinery that is very well oiled and very well networked. I mean, the neoliberal movements are very well networked and know of each other and have a system also on how to build power changing, going to other organizations' board or institutes and etc. to really make circulate this knowledge about and building power little by little, which is something that we miss a little bit also in more progressive, especially on the transnational level, on the European level, or maybe on the international level. We can say. But what is interesting as well is. To come back to your point, is how do you ground the policies that you're developing in also people's realities? Because it's true that sometimes it's difficult to make sure that all the different lived experiences of the people and their own perceptions, and then as social movements, sometimes they're not completely diverse. I mean, sometimes they are a little bit more unified, or sometimes there are more middle class people in there, and so how do you but they're perfectly legitimate in their claims. The problem is that they are not always representative. So how do you see this in your own context? I mean, how much do you think it can be a problem, especially when you come to power and then all of a sudden the people that have built the platform with you are expecting to be represented very well? Ivan, Alexander,
yeah. Okay. I don't think there's this great line of divide between us sitting here, talking these ideas, and the reality being somewhere on the streets. I mean, we're all equally exploited in a sense. I mean, equally part of the same system, because the ideas that have been put forward by the New Left have been ideas that have not originated in academia. To be perfectly clear, these are the things that you will not hear in faculties, in different high-level institutions being developed, policy-making decision alternatives, and they are not part of a single elitist group of left-wing thinkers or whatever, but have been, in a sense, crafted from different struggles. So the other thing is that I think what divides us from the previous versions of the left is establishment employment, because the previous liberal left could be employed in establishment, could had a wide range of public publicity, media, availability to go through institutions and do something. That's only, I think, at least even in an optimistic way, it's maybe a beginning to happen only now in Serbia or throughout the region. So in this sense, I think before you can put forward any sort of ideas into action, you have to have a wide range of background, of coalition between different social actors which can influence concrete policy. If you look at our relations with different countries, if you look at the working class, the German working class lives in Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia. It's not the other way around. The guys that are working for foreign institutions and firms come from peripheral countries. It's called outsourcing, and it's here. And it basically means that any sort of stoppage within the periphery would affect the core as well. So there's this, double bind between the core and the periphery, but this does not mean that, for example, the working class in Germany is any, in any privileged position within the Serbian working class. So it affects both classes in the center and the periphery, but that also tells you a lot of where the potentials for any activity of opposition go.
Yeah. I agree completely, and I think the question might be, the right question might be not how to make sure that the demands of the grassroots movement reflect everyday struggles, but to kind of build a collective consciousness about that among those who struggle. To give you an example, I mean, you mentioned the foreign direct investments. In Macedonia, there have been so many times when people from the grassroots movement would go and try to talk to workers from these factories where the working conditions are really terrible. In one of them, there's 150 women using 3 toilets and they can only go to the toilet. I'm giving you an example just to plastically explain how bad it is. They can only go to the toilet when there's a break for that. So we go and talk to them, and then on a personal level, on an atomized level, one by one, they do agree with you, but they don't want to organize themselves. They think they might lose their jobs, which is understandable. So the question then is, it's not so much of channeling up, so to say, channeling up the demands, but it's also building up the equal level in some ways. That's one. And the second thing is, I think it's an important question that the left faces is how once a party is in power or a coalition is in power, they are obviously they have a different role to play than the one when they're a candidate, when they're running towards something. So when they try to balance out this, how do they balance out the role they play in a global, well, in our case, peripheral, semi-peripheral area, and also how do they reflect the needs of those that elected them. And what happens then, sometimes governments, even when they are from the left, act a bit schizophrenically. To give you an example again from Macedonia, because this is it's happening now, so it's very recent and it's exciting. So on the one hand, they say that they want to advance labor rights, and I do believe them, and they've integrated people from the movement in doing so, but they also they say that we will continue this trend of attracting foreign direct investments the same way which was before, which was through cheap labor. So how do you do both things, really? And so I think those are both challenges. The way I see them is that the organized grassroots movement has challenges facing horizontally, on expanding or getting people on board with the struggles that they do face, but also vertically towards whoever is in power, but particularly when we have someone who is willing to listen in power.
I think that the same problem was in UK. I even read an article about Tony Blair having a meeting with representatives of trade unions, saying that, oh no, his political ideas will completely protect the workers. They will put strong, bounds on the capital and so on. And then having lunch, and then after lunch having another meeting with entrepreneurs, and then saying completely opposite in the same day, 2 hours later. Yeah. So it's really the problem of let's call it the third way left. It's really a problem, but let me just put back you're mentioning neoliberal social movements and so on in the beginning of your question. Well, I'm not sure whether there are neoliberal social movements. I think there are conservative social movements, there are socialist, social democrat social movements, but I'm not familiar about neoliberal social movements. And I think that the reason is because neoliberalism doesn't need social movements. Neoliberal parties are founded and supported not by social movements, not by participation of citizens, but by the capital and the wealthy. So I think that social movements is the only thing that social democracy can count on, because otherwise either we can reject the money from banks and from huge companies. In that case, we'll be completely broke, or we can accept it. In that case, we won't be social democrats anymore, and we'll turn out to be neoliberal as well. So I believe that social movements are actually maybe maybe not only social movements, just citizens in general, are what social democracy has to count on in order to come in power and in order to stay in power.
Yeah, but can I follow? I think one big challenge has been, I completely agree, and I think one big challenge has been how to repoliticize what has been depoliticized. Yeah, because the public sphere has been completely depoliticized, which exactly it's only neoliberalism or neoliberal powers that have to gain from. Mm-hmm. So I think that is the bigger challenge, we have this hyper-production of news, of daily news, that actually depoliticizes people quite a bit. And interesting, I found it very interesting. I was reading some studies on Yugo-nostalgia, on people being nostalgic for Yugoslavia, and they have found that it's not just the social state that they were nostalgic towards, which is understandable, but they were also nostalgic towards them people having sense of agency, having sense of control over their own lives. So I found it, interesting but also tragic that in a single-party system, people felt that they were more in control of their life through different councils, neighborhood associations, whatnot. They were more in control of their life than they are nowadays with a multi-party system. Yeah. So it speaks volumes about democracy.
No, that's an interesting, actually, because we can feel with what, if I understood what you said, that we are also in a transitioning period where people are trying to to repoliticize themselves through, these new forms of grassroots movements that we like Rabbi Nash, but also others that you mentioned before. And so this is also very interesting, and this transition, which is also the same when now. When people are also transitioning, when these platforms are also going into power, there is also a transition, and how do you deal with this as well? And so this is also the next challenge. When you are repoliticized and finally have the feeling, okay, I can get into power, I can re-affect the decisions that are, affecting me, then still it's a question of, dealing with this double standard when you say these big systems that are just pulling you, towards policies that you don't want, neoliberalism system that are influencing you, and trying to stay close to the citizens. So no, just last round, just to say what would be for you as part of the platform here, building it up. What would be the next step? What do you think? What do you think should happen so that the process is working?
Building institutional infrastructure for resistance. Basically, what you said about neoliberal movements not existing, not only they don't exist, neoliberalism exists actually by demobilizing the masses through precarious contracts, through all these institutional pressures from up above. And it's not only that it demobilizes the masses that are presently here, it involves a certain amount of deep infrastructural change that has never happened since the 1920s, and that's what Gaspar Miklos Tamas calls the reversal of universal citizenship. Basically meaning that you can now have any social, economic rights that are associated with you being a citizen of any single nation state, or being protected in any other way by simply existing, by simply being born here. And in this sense, austerity has not only influenced these generations, but the entire setting in which people would evolve in the following years, and any sort of resistance would have to attack that. In a sense of rebuilding, the union infrastructure, unionizing precarious labor, connecting different student movements, bodies, unions, and any sort of resisting body with institutions, because this is not only functioning on the level of simple, dictate from, some Brussels, some IMF, or some any other institutions, but actually is connected in a way that, neoliberalism is an international thing, and it's not going to be broken down simply like that. So in this sense, we have to first build the conditions of resistance before going into the resistance itself. Yeah.
Very shortly, Ivan, and then I give you the last word.
Okay, so what I believe that actually all leftist parties have to do is to find some kind of middle way, a middle ground between elitism and populism. Because what we see is that left parties during the 90s, during Tony Blair, during Bill Clinton, Schroeder, and so on, have turned out towards some form of elitist management within political parties, and elitist actually policies that were put out. On the other hand, the pure populism, I believe, is disastrous as well, and mostly because we can see that populism now in Europe is mostly or almost exclusively right-wing populism. But nonetheless, to take care that this message is a correct one, not just any message or just message that people would go out in the street and say, yeah, this is what we believe. We need to combine the academic expertise on the one hand and to send the message, but also to create the message, not only to send it, to create it in coordination with the masses, with the citizens, and so on. And also to wrap it up, we're constantly talking about what's the next left, what's new left, what kind of new left should we have for the 21st century, and so on and so on. But it seems, and that's one of the things that we mentioned in the panel discussion on Sunday, that actually I'm not sure what this new left should look like. Maybe it's better to look back and see what the old left looked like and to try to bring it back, because it seems that this is what people want. If you look at what Jeremy Corbyn does or what Bernie Sanders puts forward, these are actually extremely old leftist ideas. This is not something very new. It's the things how they were in 60s or 50s. So I believe that's the correct course for the next left, to actually to go back and not to keep going forward.
I think I think in that the new left, I think there should have been a comma between the new and the left. Because the new left in the sense not of ideas, but in the sense of against the status quo. And actually what you see across the globe, it's interesting, I think the first time in history we have a discussion anti-globalization in the core of those moving the globalization, not in the periphery, in the core. So it's it's interesting times to have these discussions, but across Europe and in the US, you see this anti-status quo voting. Trump is an anti-status quo vote. Labor is anti. So the question is, who is going to offer the new? And then the left should be that. That's why when they talk about new left, I think there should have been a comma between the new and the left. And absolutely, I think we have to draw on, especially in the post-Yugoslav space, we have ideas and we have legacies that no matter how demonized they have been in recent decades, that are worth exploring. We talked about gender equality the other day, which was much more advanced during Yugoslavia than it is now. So then what is the next challenge? To go back to your question, what is the next challenge? I mean, the next challenge is I like the fact that we have a platform to learn from different experiences, because there's valuable experiences across the region that I would not have heard of, or we would not have heard of, because they're local struggles, but they're local and often successful struggles from which we can learn. But that's one thing that could happen in this or any other platform. What do we do with how do we channel our message, and in this case, particular policy recommendations? I think there's at least two levels to that. One is, in some countries now there's an opening to again, I speak from the Macedonian experience, where now there's an opening to actually go and present some of the policies that we have, the policy recommendations that we have. In other cases, I think we'll have to continue building alliances one way or another, because the challenges are not national. They are reflected nationally, but the challenges are much wider, bigger. What do we do in a very non-committal way? We'll keep talking, we'll keep thinking left, and hopefully we'll continue acting left as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your different perspectives, and we have a little bit of hints about how different ways of how to build power in the next. So thank you very much, and
thank you.